Welcome to this video on assessment in active learning. There are various reasons why we assess. The list presented here is not exhaustive, but they include the main reasons for assessing students' learning and performance. We want to know the impact of our teaching, that is, how has our teaching furthered students' knowledge, understanding, and developing a broad skill set. Second, we want to measure the extent to which students have understood the learning activities. This brings me to the third point. We make decisions based on assessment, the decision to pass or fail a course, which leads students to enter the next course, or having to write a resit exam. Also, we use assessment for decisions on whether students have acquired sufficient knowledge and/or other competencies to graduate from a program or provide them with any other kind of certificate. And fourth, we also want to distinguish between students' achievements and be able to rank order them based on performance. And finally, we can assess to drive learning. As a starting point for assessment driving learning, we need to provide information on all assessment components for the students, so they know what is expected from them and what they can work towards. Even more important, if we want to facilitate the development of a broad skill set and train students to acquire multiple diverse competencies, this should be reflected in the assessment as well, in the sense that we actually assess these competencies and not only focus on knowledge testing. Evidence shows that different forms of assessment drive learning in different ways to a different extent. We can distinguish assessment of learning, assessment for learning, and assessment as learning. I will explain these forms in the next few slides. Assessment of learning is the most conventional summative type of evaluation, like final exams or big projects, used to judge what students have learned at the end of a unit or course, focusing on grading and reporting against standards. Assessment of learning is very much teacher-led. It is summative, meaning used for decision making based on a quantifiable outcome. This approach certifies learning and is often used in reportings. Think, for instance, about performance comparisons across students' cohorts, or for marketing purposes, showcasing a particular training or course yields high performance in terms of scores. Although this is the dominant form of assessment and it is widely accepted, questions can be raised as to the extent in which this really drives learning. Oftentimes we see that students cram for an end-of-period test only to forget all about what they studied a bit after. The test is then what they study for, not because they are intrinsically motivated to learn. Also, grades or markings are not very informative of the learning process. And assessments like these most often assess cognitive learning and as such are not reflective of a broader range of competencies. Assessment for learning is an approach to teaching and learning that creates feedback, which is then used to improve students' performance. In this approach, students become more involved in the learning process, so it stimulates learning more than assessment of learning does. Both teacher and student have an active role in this. It is formative in the sense that feedback is provided that can be used in the service of the next stage of learning. It is constructive in the sense that it is based on what students know and can do. It identifies particular learning needs, and unlike most summative assessment, it is done in the middle of the learning trajectory and often more than once instead of at the end only. In that, it traces progression of students along a learning continuum and as such motivates the students to learn. Finally, assessment as learning is a formative process where students become their own assessors, actively monitoring, reflecting on, and taking responsibility for their learning process. More than the other two forms of assessment, this puts ownership with the students, and as such, it is student-driven. In this form, students act as active, engaged, and critical assessors and personally monitor what they are learning. They formulate their own learning goals and continuously use feedback by peers, teachers, and self-evaluations to make adjustments, adaptations, and changes in what they understand. This form of assessment stimulates metacognition and empowers students to shape and develop their own learning trajectory. This form is more innovative and has been evidenced to fit best with competency-based active learning methods and enhancing students' learning capacity the most. So, how can we use assessment in competency-based active learning approaches? Variation is key, as is collecting information at various time points to monitor the learning process rather than only the end-of-course learning outcomes. You may use combinations of summative and formative assessment for individual or group assignments. In the case of formative approaches, include feedback exercises. The teacher can give feedback, so can peers, or students themselves in the form of self-evaluation or reflection reports. If you do this across courses, the final summative decision on whether or not to graduate the student is based on a comprehensive range of data points, covering the different competencies that we intend to train. These assessments should further provide opportunities for pursuing learners' own interests, while at the same time taking into account the program or course requirements. In short, assessment in active learning should always be competency-based, reflecting competencies as captured by the learning outcomes through authentic tasks. This slide gives a few assessment options that can be used in active learning. I already mentioned peer feedback, self-evaluations, and reflections. Other active forms of assessment can be students writing a blog or newspaper article or recording a vlog. To assess the extent to which they can communicate concisely and effectively, you could have them do a pitch. For enhancing critical thinking, you may ask them to evaluate the courses in a written paper and have them come up with suggestions for improving these courses in terms of content or learning activities. To enhance their competencies as a researcher, you can ask them to review a paper or write a commentary on the course topic. Many variations and combinations are possible. This list is not exhaustive. You can find other assessment options online. What these options have in common, they are all authentic tasks related to the roles that transdisciplinary professionals can take on, and they stimulate active learning. Thank you for watching. We invite you to also watch the other videos in this series.